Welcome to the Principal's Perspective, where we explore what it really takes to lead a school and why great leadership is a way of being and a set of skills that can be learned. I'm Dr. Adrian Cam.
And I'm Tegan Collins. Whether you're leading a school, an organisation, or preparing for your next leadership move, we're here to break down the strategies, challenges, and real-life moments that define leadership today.
This podcast is your guide to navigating leadership with clarity, confidence, and impact.
Let's get into today's episode.
We finished off the last episode talking about the importance of vision, the principal or the CEO, senior leadership team leading the way, setting the vision, developing a strategy, implementing the strategy, and then allocating the appropriate resources to see it through to its success. So it's a really great follow-on episode, this episode, where we're talking about financials. We're framing this episode around money matters. And I think money matters in all aspects of our lives, but it also matters in a school context. And sometimes people forget that in the independent system in Australia, yes, we're a school, we're a place of education for young people, but we also operate as a not-for-profit business. And so that's something that we grapple with all the time, Tegan, in some of our conversations and decision-making with people around making sure we're managing their expectations that, yes, we're a place of learning, but in order for us to be here for another 160 years, we also have to make sure the school's financially viable well into the future.
It's a responsibility we have, and that's something that we do a lot of work around in terms of messaging and communicating with staff around the finances of the school, and it's not a never-ending bucket, and it's all got to come from somewhere. And we do have a finite resource. And it can be really challenging because nobody really likes to talk about money. Some people cringe as when people talk about schools as businesses.
They do.
How do you feel about the phrase?
I think it depends on when you would have asked me. Maybe 10, 15 years ago when I was first starting out as a teacher, I probably would have held that opinion. Like, why are we talking about money? We're a school. Let's focus on what actually matters. Probably even as far as maybe 8 years ago. But it was when I was first stepping onto an executive team and I held a role leading the teaching and learning across a large independent school. And I probably still held that naive view then that, hey, teaching and learning is why we're all here. Let's talk about the stuff that actually matters.
You had the most important job in the room.
Right. But I think as you mature and I think as you move into a more senior role, gain experience, you understand the complexities of leading in large organisations like ours, and it's complicated. And in fact, the business side of things is just as important, if not more so, provocatively, than everything else in our context. So we're in Australia, we're in the independent education system. So schools like ours, we operate as a not-for-profit business, which means any surplus that we generate at the end of each year is reinvested back into the school. We don't pay dividends to shareholders. You and I, we don't receive bonuses. The directors of our board, they volunteer their time in their capacity to help govern the school. But it's really important for us to make really good, sound financial decisions, because if we don't, we can't pay our bills, the school closes, we become insolvent. And as stewards of the school, particularly a school like ours that's been around for 160 years, one of our main responsibilities is to ensure its long-term financial sustainability and viability long into the future. And in fact, that's our mission. So there's lots of different decisions that we need to make that perhaps people won't be happy with, but it's all around how we do that. And it's about communicating why we're doing what we're doing, which has been a really big part of our work, as you mentioned, Tegan, over the last few years. Educating our community, and not being condescending, but educating our community around the types of tensions that we grapple with when we're making decisions in the best interests of the school. And so standing up in front of staff and explaining how the business operates and talking about things really openly and transparently, which is probably not my experience in other schools. What's your experience been like?
I've at some schools there has been that conversation, and it's been the education piece to talk about the competing priorities and the competing demands, and for example, highlighting some of the biggest costs that the school is obliged to carry out, and perhaps how little room there is left for everything else, like particularly when we take out staff costs and what that means. And, factoring in perhaps fundraising or philanthropy or philanthropic endeavours, where does that money go? Why might it be allocated to the recent or newest capital build, or, and I think it opens up the conversation of there's always going to be, oh, well, why are we building a new music and performing arts school, which is on our master plan in design at the moment? There's always going to be people who feel as though that priority should be elsewhere. But I think it's within our roles to shed light on our thinking, why we're thinking that way, why it's important, and why we've made the decision, so that they can tell the story too, because we know that if we don't tell stories, people will make up their own narrative.
I like shedding the light, and I think that's a much better phrase than educating people, because we are providing insight into the way schools operate. And when we talk about distributed leadership and what we both believe, it's about bringing people along on that journey with us and making sure they're all aware of why we're doing what we're doing. So 70 to 75% of our revenue is spent on staff salaries, and then 25 to 30% is spent on operational costs, so curriculum resources, materials for in-classroom, excursions, electricity, paying the bills. And then we do generate a surplus. All independent schools try and generate a surplus at the end of the year. And the way they go about that is different in every different context. But they might set a financial target come budget time and aim to generate a certain percentage of operating margin or surplus each year. And that could be 10% of your revenue. Now, people will say, well, where does that 10% go? Well, that gets reinvested back into the school as a business. Now, primarily, that is around maintaining or improving your facilities. Because what happens if you don't invest in your facilities at least equal to or greater than the rate of depreciation? Your buildings fall into a state of disrepair. Now, some people won't mind, but if I'm a parent and I'm paying tuition fees to send my child to your school, I expect the facilities to be of a particular standard. And if they're not, rightfully, I'll be asking questions. All of a sudden you're dealing with potential reputational issues from a school. If you fast forward through that, you play it forward, that could lead to loss of enrolments. Loss of enrolments lead to loss of revenue, which ultimately would mean less staff, so people would lose their jobs. Your operational surplus then becomes less. You can't reinvest in your facilities the way that you need to, so they continually fall into a state of disrepair, and it's a self-fulfilling downward spiral that is hard to escape from.
And that keeps me up at night. We talk about what keeps you up at night, and one thing, thinking about in however long it might be when I start to apply for principalships, and that's a goal and aspiration I have in my future of what does the balance sheet look like? Where are they sitting financially? What's the state of play? And imagine being, well, I hope neither of us ever have to do this. I hope no principal ever has to do this, but the reality is that it's happening in a position where they're going, how are we going to pay our bills? And that keeps me up at night.
And I can understand why, because it's there's so many responsibilities on a principal, but that financial sustainability and viability is central to many of the others. So, and there's a lot of variables at play. We've seen in Victoria, in Australia, the government has just imposed payroll tax on independent schools, which is a significant tax that independent schools were previously exempt from.
And there's an argument to say that it's a redistribution of funds, because they're quite poisonous debate around should independent schools be receiving funding at all.
Right.
But the reality is that independent schools have been operating with the funding. So withdrawing it means a reshuffling and a reimagining of what's coming in. So there is an undeniable impact. And then, if it continues to increase, I know that the phrasing perhaps around some Principles that I've heard is they're saying, well, we're now paying the government to run our schools, which is contentious as well, I acknowledge. But then what happens if land tax comes in? That would be a huge hit to our bottom line. So the financial landscape is really complex.
It is. And so the government funding is always something that's going to be an element of risk for independent schools, because depending upon the political priorities of the day, government funding to independent schools could change. And we've seen changes even in our time here, Tegan, in terms of a reduction in government funding. So if you take those two key aspects of the financial leadership of a school, there's many others, but if you just take those two for a moment, so the imposition of the payroll tax in a large independent school like ours, or even the smaller ones, then the variability or the unknown future of government funding, how are independent schools making up for that shortfall? Well, they're charging more fees. And so I think there'll become a point in the future where pricing and affordability for an independent education will reach a tipping point. Now, what is that? We don't know.
And how elastic is the market to start with?
Right. Will that be another factor that then impacts enrolment in schools, which then impacts financial sustainability and viability moving forward?
And we've seen that we continue to see a drift towards independent schools. The numbers continue to increase. I think it's about 17% of all young people in Australia are at an independent school. And has continued to increase over the decades. So parents are voting with their feet.
Yeah.
They have a choice. There is parental choice within this, and they're choosing to buy advantage, perhaps some would argue, for their children. They see the benefit, they see the value creation and the proposition. But to what extent? When fees hit record levels with some schools almost at 10%.
Right.
When traditionally perhaps 3 to 4% would have been the status quo.
Right. And then wages and salaries aren't keeping up. And so the real price and affordability of a school, of an independent education is increasing relative to everything else.
And of course, you see fees increase, so staff would naturally draw the parallel to say, okay, well, if fees are increasing by that much, then shouldn't my salary be increasing by that much?
That's interesting, isn't it? And that's a real example that we've had here at Westbourne in terms of talking with staff around, well, it doesn't quite work like that because our costs, the school's costs, also increase. And so we've invested really heavily in our people, and people is actually one of the main pillars of our strategic map to 2030. And so we wanted to put our money where our mouth was, so to speak, and we wanted to position our staff as having salaries in the top 10% in the state, and we wanted to look at face-to-face teaching requirements because, let's face it, workload is one of the big topics of the day. And so we wanted to be really proactive and make some meaningful change around teacher workload. And so we engaged our staff in some consultation around what does your professional practice look like here at the school moving forward, and how can we get to a sweet spot where you're happy, it aligns with our strategic priorities, but it also makes financial sense for us as a school.
We did a lot of work on that. If staff are looking at my school, where are we at, as opposed to other schools, what's a full load? How many classes do you have as a full load? But then there's the shoulders of the day too. What's the meeting expectation? Is there professional learning communities? What's the professional learning expectation? There's shoulders that sit not only just within the timetable, but on top of the timetable. And we know that the administrative burden's increasing, on staff compliance is increasing. We're asking more of our workforce than has ever been asked of them before. Class sizes is a contentious topic.
Always.
Students with additional learning needs. The landscape of within classrooms today, some would say is the most challenging it's ever been. So how do we support staff, but also and we'd love to provide huge salaries, lots of time, but unfortunately there's only so much that we can do within our financial constraints. So how do we maximise that and make sure that we get the best, the payoff?
The way I see it, everyone, it's natural, right? Everyone wants more time to do their job. They want more money and they want less work. That's just natural. but unfortunately it doesn't quite work like that. So it is about working within the parameters and the boundaries of your context and also within the societal context around what is actually achievable.
And what's going to give you the most bang for buck, if you like, of, okay, that was X incentive might cost us $500,000 a year, but are we seeing the payoff for the whole workforce? Is everybody seeing a reduction in workload from that investment? And perhaps, and something we talk about a lot is we might get different groups of staff or different members of our team wanting more time for someone in their team. And that education piece, again, not to be condescending, as we said earlier, but how much does that 0.1 FTE cost the school?
Yeah.
As opposed to an increase in a position of responsibility allowance or learning area allowance, depending on the language of the school. Time and money are seen as two different things, perhaps within the workforce. But from Nicole's perspective, when she's crunching the numbers, it all comes out in the wash together.
Yeah.
So how can we continue to have that conversation? I think that one of the things that was certainly helpful for me earlier in my career is I was on a finance subcommittee. So we had an arrangement where everyone on the leadership team, the executive team, would feature on one or more subcommittees of the board. And for me, that was a really critical moment in time, really crucial in my career to learn about what was discussed, what was a priority of the board, what did the principal have to explain and justify. And to some it might seem quite simple in that, okay, we've got a budget and we just have to work within it. But it's so nuanced. And for us, we have, I suppose, expanded that with the executive team, and we'll unpack financial reports to the board as a team, take 10, 20 minutes at the start of an exec meeting to review that, to really paint the picture and give everyone the context so that when people do come to us to say, I'd like to add an additional staff member here in this team, or so increase the FTE of a part-time staff member, or restructure my team, they've got the context of knowing, hang on a minute, we've budgeted for X amount of FTE or X amount of staff members within the year to the board, and we're at the limit. So I've got to look for more creative ways to find efficiencies here.
I think it's a whole new language, right? Finances, school finances, or finances in general. Managing your own personal finances is one thing, but then managing a $60, $70, $80 million a year environment, that's different. There are different challenges and different things to consider, because it's not just about one person or one area of the school. It's about stepping back, zooming out, if you like, and looking at it holistically before you can zoom back in and make specific decisions, which you're talking about.
And that's where that relationship with the director of business or business manager or CFO or different structures in every school, that relationship is so critical. They're the subject matter experts. But ultimately, you're still responsible for what happens.
Right. So from my perspective, some of the things that I think about constantly is our master plan. So we developed a 15-year facilities master plan 3 years ago based on a needs assessment of our current facilities across the school. We are a great independent school in Australia, and yet some of our facilities are really, really tired. And so we made the decision that we were going to do 6 stages of master planning works that would completely reimagine the facilities, particularly at our Truganina campus, so that we were proud of the facilities, and we had facilities that matched the world-class programs that take place here. We also decided that we were going to build a new campus based on demand. So we're very fortunate here at Westbourne because we're located in the 3rd fastest growing area in Australia. There's huge demand for an education at our school, which outstrips the number of places that are available. So through a lot of work with you, with the executive team, with the board, we decided we're going to build a new 1,500 student campus in Lovely Banks, which is about 30 minutes from where we are today. Now, that's a huge undertaking in and of itself, and it's going to require a lot of money in order to realise that vision. And so when you talk about school finances, you're talking about the day-to-day, you're talking about subject budgets, you're talking about, do we get catering for this meeting or not? Or as you've rightly pointed out, how much time do we actually waste in meetings by actually trying to equate people's salaries by the time that it's there, and does everyone actually need to be there?
It's a bit facetious, but I have worked with someone in the past who I'm sure will be listening, and he was very adamant to say, let's put the dollar value at the bottom of every agenda,
Right.
so that we know we need to work fast and be efficient in this meeting.
Right. If this meeting's going to cost us $1,000, do we need to have it? It's a really, really interesting discussion. So there's those sorts of things, but then it's bigger picture. Do you have any debt as a school? Because let's face it, debt is how business is done often in 2025. And schools often go into debt to service new buildings or part of capital projects. Now, thankfully, we're in a really strong financial position and we've not had to go into debt for quite some time. But we will in order to realise the 6 stages of our master plan. And so that's an interesting conversation for the board to consider too, around what is their debt appetite, what is their risk appetite related to debt in order to bring about positive change in school. So there's the micro, there's the things in the middle, and then there's the macro when you start talking about school finances.
And there's every one of those elements has the grey, I suppose both sides of the coin, and the grey somewhere in between. You know, we could talk about the difference between good debt versus bad debt for a whole podcast. There's always a trade-off. If we spend money on X, then it's not going to Y. So we have to be really aligned with our decisions to say, okay, if we're investing in this program, this is what we want to see from it. You know, I'd like to pick up on one of the points you raised around class sizes and timetabling. You know, we spend a lot of time with our director of operations each year and our heads of school reviewing the timetable. You know, the efficiencies that we can find from a timetabling perspective are huge. If you have an inefficient timetable, the hundreds of thousands of dollars that can be wasted is really significant.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that in detail from a process perspective and actually talk people through what we do and how we do it, the types of questions we ask of each other, and also questioning assumptions and things that have perhaps been standard practice for many years, but do they need to be moving forward?
Things like, what's the minimum number of students in a class?
Classic. What do you think?
There's grey. Are we trying to build a subject up? For example, in VCE.
Right.
Have we introduced a new subject?
Give me an example.
Theatre studies.
Yep.
We didn't have theatre studies at one point in time. We had drama. We wanted to introduce theatre studies. And we thought, okay, let's give it a go. We saw the rationale for it. We saw the student need, but it meant that numbers were small. So do you combine Unit 1, 2 and Unit 3, 4 within the same cohort? Or do you let it run its course and assume that 1, 2, students doing Unit 1, 2 are going to roll into Unit 3, 4 next year? But then you're potentially carrying a loss if you look at it like that. You're carrying a loss for more than 12 months if they're going to flow through, because the likelihood of people picking it up at 3, 4 is low. We decided to roll with it, and we've seen the benefit now, as opposed to perhaps a subject, and I don't like to refer to subjects as dying subjects, but in schools there can be ebbs and flows, and if you continually see numbers to fall, is there another stream they should move into? You know, we've seen changes in the curriculum, for example, with music, different streams of music that are more popular in some schools than others. We've had one stream that's more popular than another. So do you run it for 2 students, or do you encourage them to move into another stream to have a similar outcome?
There's a lot in that. What hat are you wearing when you're making these decisions? Are you wearing your business hat? Because if you're wearing your business hat, there are sometimes some really obvious decisions, but it's being comfortable in the grey and looking at each case by case. And theatre studies is a great example. What's the minimum number of students that needs to be for a class to run? Once again, it's grey, right? Because it depends on the subject. Are you comfortable running a subject with 5 students because you believe that subject is important and related to your vision? Or do you say from a business perspective that that's not viable for a class to run with 5 students?
So what that looks like, you know, we go into that meeting with the right people around the table, and we all know with the business hat on, what's it going to cost to run an extra class, what the minimum number of students is from a viability perspective, a cost perspective, not talking about educational outcomes, but talking about money. How much it's going to cost to employ an extra teacher if we decide, no, we want to split that into 2 classes, therefore do we have FTE on staff, or do we need to employ another staff member, and then what's that going to cost? If we add all of those things into play, then what impact on bottom line are we looking at? So knowing all of that going in, of course, has to be weighed heavily by knowing the intricacies of the staff within the faculty or of the students who are taking that subject. Are they getting their first preferences? Are they getting their second preferences? You know, there's so many layers to this, and something that we talk about a lot is the timing of this, subject selection and subject preference. We know that young people change their minds. So do we have enough buffer in the timetable to allow for swap? For the student who thinks, no, I'd really like to go into methods, and they start methods, and by the end of term one, they're thinking, hang on a minute, this isn't working, and I'd really like to move into general. Now, yes, we can say they should have had conversations, mentoring, subject selection with whether it be our counselling team, whether it be with our careers team, with the heads of house, you know, layer on layer on layer, we have these processes, but they still change their minds. Kids are kids.
Yeah, they are.
I change my mind all the time. So how do we have buffer for that? But not too much buffer that we're being inefficient.
I remember we sit in the boardroom and the director of operations will have essentially a spreadsheet based on subject selections and a whole range of different variables that you've just spoken about, and we'll literally go through line by line. So it's as much an art as it is a science, but it all has to be connected back to your purpose, your vision, your strategic priorities, and your financial capacity, which is really important, because it's all well and good saying, listen, we'd love to offer every subject that's available, and we offer a really broad education here, which is one of the real strengths of Westbourne. But if you're in a smaller independent school, you're going to have to limit the number of offerings that you have because you just won't have the financial capacity to staff them all.
Or do you support enrolment in Virtual Schools Australia or something like that perhaps, or different languages that you're not going to offer for one child?
Right.
They might engage in that within the school day but through a different platform.
It's really complicated. So, okay, we've got 26 students wanting to do German. Is that one class of 26 or two of 13? Depends, right?
Depends. Is it 3-4? Is it 1-2? Is it year 10?
Right.
Is it what's the history of the subject?
Yeah.
Are we growing the subject? Has it been have those numbers existed prior?
Yeah.
What's the capability within the team? Does it mean we need to employ someone else if we split it into two classes, and what would their load be? Because that's the other thing. We can't go advertising a 0.2 German load. It's not appealing.
No.
If they're teaching a VCE line and they're expected to be in 4 days of the week, a part-timer, that's a difficult one for a part-timer to stomach. Do we look at alternative ways like language assistants, increasing the number of language assistants that we have within the classroom, or, you know, but then for that one teacher, if they see 26 students at the bottom of the page, that's going to be daunting. So then it becomes the relational conversation too, if that's the path we go down. Are you right though? It's an art form. That's one good example of where the two meet and how we've made a really conscious decision to bring people into the conversation rather than a set and forget.
Yeah.
This is what it is.
That doesn't mean everyone's going to get exactly what they want.
No.
But it does mean that we're at least talking with people, justifying and explaining decisions to ensure that there's a base level of understanding. One of the things I think about too, Tegan, with school finances is sometimes you become aware of an area of the school where you believe you're not being as efficient as you could be. And so you might engage someone to do a review of that area and look for ways where we can gain some greater efficiencies or make sure we're not wasting money. But I think the reality of schools is that sometimes money is wasted. And so it's really important to look at things through that lens from time to time and engage in almost like a cyclical review of different parts of the school to make sure that it is being resourced appropriately. Because it could be that they don't have enough money, but equally it could be that there's money being wasted that we need to reallocate to other areas of the school. How do you manage those conversations?
It's really complex because people feel strongly about the programs and initiatives that they've implemented. I think it comes back to painting that bigger picture, sitting down with people, understanding their concerns, their frustrations, their wants and desires, and then also for us to share our perspective and our point of view. And whilst every subject is important, at times we have to pare one area back for the greater good. But they're challenging conversations. And I think that comes back to being prepared to have those conversations with people, opening the can of worms, because status quo would be easy, but does it get the best outcomes?
Totally. So it's all about relationships at the end of the day, and it's about how you talk with people. I think if you talk with people really openly and genuinely and authentically, and you justify, whilst they may not be happy, they can at least understand. I think that's the important part. The worst thing that can happen is they get their budget pack come budget approval, and they see their budget's been slashed by 50,000 or something like that. Well, of course people are going to be upset then, and then start asking questions and making up their own stories. So it's about that personal connection.
Another contentious point perhaps for a principal in this space is if they have an individual enterprise bargaining agreement or EA agreement with their employees, that's a really contentious one too. It's full of conversations around money. People feel really passionately, of course, about the work that they do, about their conditions. When they, we talk about even where we're placing staff for the following year, what year level they're going to teach at, that's their workplace. That they come to that space every day. It's such a big influence on their lives. It's really sensitive. But that's a really big process for a principal to go through, I would imagine. You've been through 2 in the last 4 years, is it? What have been some takeaways for you?
I'm not going to say they're lots of fun, because that wouldn't be true.
No. It causes unrest. It's change.
I see in my role the worst of people come enterprise agreement time, which is a little disappointing, because if people understood where I come from, I'm all about teachers and advocating for teachers and the profession. And I'll do everything I can to create better workplace conditions for people to be paid more, for them to have more opportunities, professional development, growth. I want them to be supported to the best of our ability. But unfortunately, some people take it as an opportunity to try and undermine. Only a very few, but they see it almost as, I need to hold the plaque outside of the school gates and fight for our rights, when oftentimes that's not the best approach, and it's definitely not the approach I prefer. I prefer an approach where there are no surprises, nothing's not able to be discussed, and that we talk about things as professionals to try and get the best outcome for everyone involved. Now, once again, it comes back to money matters and the school and the context you're in and what you're able to do and the societal factors that are involved in this. For instance, New South Wales have multi-enterprise agreements, and I'm a little bit jealous of them because the principal doesn't have to do all the heavy lifting on their own or as a team, school leadership team. And there are some schools that don't have enterprise agreements, and they're all based on individual contracts. And I'm a little bit jealous of those as well.
I'm sure the principal of those schools would say, we are never introducing
right.
any type of enterprise bargaining agreement.
Right. But at the end of the day, the fundamental aspect of an enterprise agreement is people want to be valued, they want to be respected, they want to have a say in what happens, and they want to be paid well to do meaningful work in what they see as a reasonable amount of time to be able to accomplish that work. That's the way I see it. And so I don't see anything as a personal attack on me if there's a huge log of claims that come forward. I actually see it as people advocating for their rights, which is normal. And I respect that and I value that. But I think sometimes it's the way people go about the conversation that's more important than the conversation itself.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
It's a nice way to reflect on it, in that advocating for the profession and advocating for those areas of improvement rather than personal attack. Because when you're the face of a school, I'm sure it can feel like that sometimes.
That's a really challenging aspect of being a principal, because you're invested. You're invested in what you do. And if you're investing in people, you want to do what you can. But there are limitations and there are boundaries.
I remember the conversation that we were having of different scenarios and different plans of particularly around fee increases. And, at the end of the day, if the board draw a line to say this is all we're going to, it only gives so much room to play with.
That's right.
Do you grow the size of your school? Do you increase enrolments?
Yeah.
With a lot of fixed costs.
Right.
Increasing enrolments is one way to drive that income.
Totally.
Well, some would say the only way. There's a lot of innovative ways that we're exploring of revenue streams and income, which perhaps we can get to in a minute. But that's where that trade-off might come is, okay, driving enrolments will give us perhaps a little bit more room to play with come discussions around the agreement. But that does potentially result in bigger class sizes.
Yeah.
So it's that to and fro.
Give and take. And there is economies of scale. And that is one strategy that independent schools are using to buffer the imposition of payroll tax in Victoria and any potential changes to government funding. And that's great if you're in a context where there's huge demand for what you're offering. But it's not so good for those schools that are really competing with each other over every single enrolment. It's really tough for them when they're going through similar situations. But I just come back to my main point. It's about people and it's about the way you do things. And so I always like to lead by example, engage in conversations and make sure that we're talking about the things that really matter. We're not talking about the type of biscuit that's in the tea room. And I say that facetiously. We're talking about things that are actually going to matter for people. And so some come at a significant financial cost. So we invested in our teaching staff this year under our new professional practice policy. And in the senior school, teaching staff now have 16.7 contact hours of teaching time per week, which I think is one of the lowest in the state, if not Australia. And then when you combine that with the fact that we don't actually require all staff to do a Saturday morning co-curricular, our co-curricular is built into the week, and those who do a co-curricular actually get paid a stipend to do that co-curricular responsibility in addition to their salary, I think we're really generous. But then there's other things that you can do as well that don't cost money. So flexibility. We always spoke about flexibility for professional staff as being, that's easy because they don't have a teaching requirement. How do you make it work for teachers? Well, there's ways you can do it. And so one of the ways we've done that this year for teachers is that you can take on some flexibility by just letting us know that if you don't have a class, if you're not assigned an extra, you don't have any meetings, you have no co-curricular responsibilities, and you've got nothing otherwise after lunch, you're up to date with your work, everything's fine, you can take that as time off campus to be flexible with. Now, what you do with that's your decision. You could go home and continue your work. If you need to make an appointment during the day that you might not otherwise be able to, that's fine as well. That time is yours, as long as there's clear lines of communication and accountability in terms of people who are accessing that provision.
It's that professional and personal autonomy
and
trust.
Trust.
Let's come back to innovative revenue streams and some of the things that we're doing and trying to do to really buffer what we're seeing in decreased funding particularly.
Where are the opportunities for innovation and where are the opportunities for us to explore new markets? Now, we have an international student program here, but one of the interesting areas that I started exploring was this opportunity and appetite for our international markets to actually come over on short stay or study tour programs. And so what that means is that they might have 10 or 20 students of various ages that want to come over, chaperoned by qualified adults, and come and experience what a Westbourne education would be like for a week or maybe 2 weeks, experience what Australia's like before going home, and they're willing to pay for it. And so we looked at opportunities where we could make that work without negatively disrupting the experience of our day students, but actually engaging our day students in the study tour and short stay program as an opportunity for leadership development and also for greater cultural awareness and understanding of people from different parts of the world. So that's something that we're really scaling this year. So we piloted it last year. We had great success. And the level of interest in that short stay study tour program this year is such that we've actually got a dedicated person now working on that program. And we're fully booked now until the end of the year. So there are ways for schools to look at entrepreneurial means of providing additional revenue.
Without impacting the experience of our students. I think that's the one of the really critical pieces that you mentioned before.
So important. We've got groups from all over the world coming, got individual students. So we've got families travelling with their children to come and spend a week or 2 weeks here at the school. It's really added, I think, to the cultural experience of everyone here, because we've got PE teachers taking Chinese students for AFL clinics, the physics teacher taking students through esports. There's visits to local cultural sites where we've got our student leaders connecting with other student leaders from around the world. I think it just adds to the rich vibrancy and tapestry, if you like, of our school.
And when we're talking about Money Matters, these short stays and short study tours could potentially turn into enrolments as well.
Totally. So that remains to be seen, but that's the end goal. What is your conversion rate, using a business term, so to speak? If they come here for an experience, 1 to 2 weeks, they have a great time and they're actually contemplating an international school, what is the conversion rate into full-time international student enrolments? Still early days. With our new Lovely Banks campus on the horizon, it's a great initiative and one that's continuing to grow in scale and size. I guess some of the other levers that we can pull as leaders in schools from a financial perspective is, what is your giving or philanthropy culture like? Now, every school has a different approach to that and varying levels of success, but some schools can raise in excess of $1 million a year. Now, they're those schools who have a long embedded culture of philanthropy, a really mature look on that, and a really strong alumni connection. Not all schools are going to be in that same position. And of course, there are always grants and other opportunities that arise from time to time. It's just being aware of what's available and when, and making sure that you can put in your submissions or applications for whatever it is that's available. So Tegan, we're moving into our segment of In the Trenches, where we really do a deep dive into the details of a particular experience or scenario related to the topic of our episode. So given that our episode is titled Money Matters and we've been talking all things school finances, I'm really interested in picking up on one of the points you made around your learning journey, transitioning from a PE teacher into a senior leadership position and recognising or acknowledging that school finances was an area that you'd like to further develop, and what you did, how you found it, and how you're feeling about it now.
Sure. Happy to share. As I mentioned earlier, in a previous school and previous context, I was the leadership member with the hat of the finance subcommittee, and what that would look like is the head of the finance subcommittee meeting, the principal, the director of business, and I would sit down and we'd review the papers together. We'd talk about, the pre-meeting, meeting before the meeting. What are the hot topics? We'd look at the cyclical agenda. We'd look at the numbers. And I'll never forget my first meeting sitting in the principal's office thinking I feel so inadequate, looking at numbers. I'd been up as soon as I got the papers. I don't think I slept, trying to understand what was going to be of importance so that I could contribute to the conversation in the pre-meeting. Even though I'm not there to contribute, it wasn't my role. It was as an observer and to learn and part of my professional development. And I'll never forget that feeling. And I walked away from that meeting thinking, I've got to do something about this, because I want to be one day sitting in that chair as principal and I'm going to be leading that conversation. So how can I upskill myself in this area? So that was kind of brewing away in my thought bubble, if you like. And those meetings, I loved those finance meetings. I'd walk away with a million questions, and I think my business manager at the time was sick of the questions that I would bring to him, because I'd have a page full of questions and really wanted to be able to follow the conversation, understand why different items were featuring on different agendas, or didn't want to be an accountant. I don't want to be a director of business. Couldn't think of anything worse, no offense. But I really wanted to understand that, knowing that one day, hopefully, I'll have a really strong relationship with a director of business, and want to be able to delve into that and understand that myself. I think that's our responsibility. So I was studying Masters of Education at the time in educational leadership, and I finished my Masters and I walked into my principal's office, and I was thrilled, and I said, "Oh, finished. How exciting. Here's my certificate. Here's, and thinking that she was going to pat me on the back and say, "Oh, Tegan, you're so fantastic and well done, and that's it for further study. You'll never have to study again." And she said, "Great, now it's time to do your MBA." And my stomach dropped, and I thought, I'm going to be feeling like that all over again. In that pre-meeting that we had, I'm going to be feeling like that throughout this whole experience. And I thought, I'm not even going to get into one to start with, so maybe I'll just apply for it and appease her. But I walked out feeling a bit deflated, and I thought, oh.
It's like, give me a moment to shine.
Let me have my moment. But now looking back, it's the best thing that she'd ever said to me, my principal at the time, and the best thing we ever did. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but equally one of the most rewarding. And, hence the conversation about the PhD too, it scared me. And that was the same with numbers. It scared me. It was not my strength. I wasn't the student at school that loved maths. I did it and was okay at it, but never really confident. Much would have preferred to write an essay or debate or be out on the netball court or, doing something physical. And so for me, it was a real growth area. And I thought to myself, if you ever want to be a principal, you need to be across this. You need to be able to have a robust conversation with your director of business or equivalent and understand their thinking, question their thinking, be a sounding board for each other. And you're accountable to the chair of the board and to the whole community as well. And school finances is such a critical aspect, particularly of an independent school education. So my school was very supportive, allowed me the time to be able to do that, which is why we are so passionate about doing that for staff, because we've both had such incredible experiences with that. And the growth and learning trajectory was huge for me. And I look back now and I think how proud I am of myself for putting myself out there. Ironically, the day that I finished, walked back into her office. You'd be so proud of me. I finished. And she said, "Tegan, I'm so proud of you. Congratulations. But what's next?" And here we are.
Oh, that's such a great story. Thank you for sharing.
Pleasure.
How do you feel about finances now? I hate to scale things on a scale of 1 to 10, but let's go there. Your understanding and comfort level with school finances now?
I'll get the board pack and understand where we're at.
Yeah.
If I had to present on it to the board, could I do it? Yeah. If you had have asked me to do that 4 years ago, it would have kept me up at night.
What advice would you have for people who perhaps were in your position quite a few years ago and were looking to really improve their knowledge and understanding of finances?
You've got to do the work. My advice would be to sit down with your director of business, buy them a coffee or figure out what their favourite snack of choice is and have a chat with them. But then also seek learning elsewhere. And I've shifted my mindset from a young girl who walked into maths methods thinking, oh, not methods again, to now really comfortable with numbers.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
That's a wrap on today's episode of The Principal's Perspective. We hope this conversation gave you practical insights to lead with clarity, confidence, and impact.
Leadership is a continuous journey, and we'd love to keep the conversation going. You can find us on LinkedIn. Just search for Dr. Adrian Cam and Tegan Collins and let us know your thoughts, questions, or leadership wins.
Make sure to follow The Principal's Perspective on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if today's episode resonated with you, share it with someone in your network.
Until next time, keep leading with purpose, and we'll see you in the next episode. You can be sure to find any references, books, or resources we discussed today in the show notes. Please jump on into the comments and join the conversation.